put your phone or device aside and immerse yourself in this audio story. Perfect for listening on the move, while relaxing, or for bedtime listening. We release new stories daily, so make sure to like and subscribe to not miss out. This story is based on true events. The $10 million ghost. In 2007, a media company published something they thought was just another celebrity story. They had no idea they'd just made an enemy who would spend the next 9 years and over $10 million plotting their complete annihilation. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about competition. This was about something far more dangerous, a billionaire's patient, calculated revenge. And by the time the target realized what was happening, it was already too late. What happens when one of Silicon Valley's most powerful investors decides you must be destroyed? What happens when someone with infinite resources and infinite patience marks you for extinction? This is the dark business story of Peter Thiel's secret war, a billionaire secret's tale that would rewrite the rules of power, wealth, and revenge in America. Peter Thiel didn't look like someone plotting destruction. By 2007, the PayPal co-founder and Facebook's first outside investor had already accumulated wealth most people couldn't comprehend. He sat on boards, shaped Silicon Valley's future, and operated in circles where billions moved with a handshake. But beneath that calculated exterior, something darker was brewing, something patient, something that would reveal just how far wealth and power could reach when pointed at a single target. Gawker Media was everything Thiel despised. Founded by Nick Denton, a British journalist with a taste for exposing what the powerful wanted hidden, Gawker had built an empire on a simple premise: publish the truth, no matter who it hurt. Their Manhattan offices buzzed with young writers, hungry to break the next scandal, to pull back the curtain on celebrity lies and corporate hypocrisy. They called it journalism. Their critics called it something else entirely. In December 2007, Gawker's technology blog Valleywag published an article with a deceptively simple headline about Peter Thiel being gay. For most people in 2007, this might have seemed like gossip. But for Thiel, who had carefully controlled his public image and hadn't publicly come out, this was a violation, an invasion, a line crossed that demanded consequences. What Gawker didn't understand was that they hadn't just written a story about a billionaire. They'd created an enemy who thought in decades, not quarters. An enemy who understood that in the world of wealth and power, revenge wasn't a dish served hot. It was served cold, methodical, and absolutely devastating. In the shadows of Silicon Valley's boardrooms, Thiel began to plan. But this wouldn't be a public war. There would be no angry press releases, no lawyers filing obvious lawsuits with his name attached. That wasn't how true power operated. Real power worked in the dark, through proxies, through layers of separation so thick that when the knife finally struck, no one could trace it back to the hand that held it. Thiel understood something fundamental about the business of destruction. You don't attack your enemy where they're strong. You find their weakness, their exposure, their single point of failure. And for Gawker, that weakness wasn't their content. It was their business model. They were a media company built on advertising revenue and legal immunity. Take away that immunity, and the whole empire would collapse under the weight of a single lawsuit. The machinery of revenge began to turn, invisible and relentless. Somewhere in the background, lawyers were being contacted. Not Thiel's lawyers. That would be too obvious. Instead, a legal team began quietly reaching out to anyone who'd been damaged by Gawker's brand of journalism. Anyone with a grievance. Anyone with a case that might, with proper funding and expert legal strategy, bring down the entire operation. Years passed. Gawker continued publishing, unaware of the trap being constructed around them. They broke stories, ruined reputations, and reveled in their power to expose secrets. Meanwhile, In offices where hourly rates exceeded what most people earned in a week, lawyers were building a case. Not for Thiel, for someone else entirely. Someone who'd been humiliated by Gawker in the most public way imaginable. The first hook came in 2012, though no one recognized it yet. Gawker published a sex tape featuring Hulk Hogan, the legendary wrestler whose real name was Terry Bollea. It was exactly the kind of content that drove traffic and defined Gawker's brand. Shocking, invasive, and defended under the banner of newsworthiness. When Hogan's lawyers demanded they take it down, Gawker refused. They'd won these fights before. They had Section 230 protection, First Amendment arguments, and a legal team that specialized in defending controversial journalism. What they didn't know was that Hulk Hogan's lawsuit wasn't being funded by Hulk Hogan. Behind the curtain, behind the lawyers and the depositions and the court filings, Peter Thiel's money was flowing. $10 million channeled through legal firms, funding the most comprehensive assault on a media company in modern American history. This wasn't a lawsuit. It was a corporate execution disguised as justice. The legal strategy was brilliant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Thiel's team wasn't trying to change laws or challenge First Amendment protections directly. They were finding the one case where Gawker had crossed a line that even their usual defenses couldn't protect. A sex tape, recorded without consent, published despite legal demands to remove it. In the courtroom, this wouldn't be about journalism. It would be about privacy, dignity, and a media company that had become drunk on its own power. As the case moved through the courts, Gawker's leadership remained confident. They'd faced legal threats before and survived. Their lawyers assured them that First Amendment protections were strong, but they didn't understand what they were really facing. This wasn't a typical lawsuit where the plaintiff might settle or run out of money. This was an opponent with infinite resources, infinite patience, and a singular goal: complete destruction. Nick Denton, Gawker's founder, began to sense something was wrong. The Hogan case was too well funded, too perfectly executed. Normal plaintiffs didn't have this kind of legal firepower. Normal plaintiffs ran out of money, settled, or gave up. But Hogan's team kept coming, kept pushing, kept funding a case that should have bankrupted any individual plaintiff years ago. The trial began in March 2016 in a Florida courtroom. By then, rumors had started circulating about a mysterious benefactor funding Hogan's case. But no one had proof. No one could connect the dots back to the billionaire who'd been quietly orchestrating this destruction for 9 years. Thiel's name never appeared on court documents. His lawyers never stood in the courtroom. He was a ghost in his own revenge story, which made him all the more dangerous. The trial was a masterclass in legal warfare. Hogan's team painted Gawker not as journalists pursuing truth, but as bullies profiting from humiliation. They showed the jury internal Gawker emails that revealed a company culture callous to the pain they caused. They highlighted moments where Gawker had been given chances to remove the content and refused. And most devastatingly, they put Gawker's own editor on the stand, where under cross-examination, he was forced to admit that there were lines even Gawker wouldn't cross. But those lines were disturbingly far from where most people drew them. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours. And then came the second hook, the moment when Peter Thiel's patient revenge finally revealed itself. On March 18, 2016, the jury awarded Hulk Hogan $140 million in damages, not the few million Gawker had been expecting, not an amount that would hurt but could be managed. $140 million, an amount specifically calculated to exceed Gawker's insurance coverage and destroy the company entirely. It was a financial execution, delivered by 12 jurors who had no idea they were instruments in a billionaire's decade-long revenge plot. The verdict sent shockwaves through media circles. Journalists who had cheered Gawker's aggressive tactics suddenly realized the vulnerability of their entire industry. If a billionaire could secretly fund lawsuits to destroy media companies they disliked, what did that mean for journalism? What did that mean for power and accountability? But those questions were philosophical. For Gawker, the reality was immediate and brutal. They were finished. Within weeks, the truth emerged. Forbes broke the story that Peter Thiel had been the secret funder behind Hogan's lawsuit. When confronted, Thiel didn't deny it. In fact, he embraced it with a chilling matter-of-factness that revealed everything about how the wealthy operate in America's justice system. It's less about revenge and more about specific deterrence, he told the New York Times, as if destroying a media company was just another business strategy. I saw Gawker pioneer a unique and incredibly damaging way of getting attention by bullying people even when there was no connection with the public interest. But the language of deterrence and public interest couldn't hide what everyone now understood. A single billionaire had identified an enemy, funded their destruction through the courts, and succeeded in erasing them from existence. This wasn't about justice in any traditional sense. This was about power. The power to weaponize the legal system, to wage war through proxies, to destroy completely while maintaining perfect deniability until the moment of victory. The business implications were staggering. Thiel hadn't just destroyed Gawker, he'd demonstrated a blueprint for how the ultra-wealthy could eliminate critics, silence opposition, and rewrite the rules of media accountability. The cost to him? Roughly $10 million, pocket change for someone whose net worth was measured in billions. The cost to Gawker? Everything. By August 2016, Gawker Media filed for bankruptcy. The company's assets were auctioned off to Univision for $135 million, barely enough to cover the Hogan judgment. Gawker.com, the flagship site that had defined a generation of online journalism, was permanently shut down. Hundreds of employees lost their jobs. A media empire built over 13 years was dismantled in months. Nick Denton, who'd built Gawker from nothing into one of the most influential media companies on the internet, was personally bankrupted. The man who'd made a career of exposing others' secrets now watched his own empire collapse in the most public way imaginable. There was a cruel poetry to it, a symmetry that Thiel's patient revenge had orchestrated perfectly. But the real darkness of this business story goes deeper than one company's destruction. What Thiel demonstrated was a new kind of power available only to the ultra-wealthy. The ability to wage legal warfare by proxy, to fund litigation as a form of corporate assassination, to use the courts not for justice, but for elimination. He'd shown that with enough money and patience, you could destroy any enemy, silence any critic, erase any opposition, all while technically operating within the law. The billionaire secrets revealed by this case terrified media companies across America. Suddenly, every investigative journalist had to wonder, was there a billionaire out there who might fund a decade-long legal assault against their publication? Every controversial story had to be weighed not just against libel law, but against the possibility that unlimited resources might weaponize even a technically legal claim into an existential threat. The chilling effect was immediate and profound. Thiel's defenders argued he'd simply helped someone, Hulk Hogan, access justice they deserved but couldn't afford, that the case had merit, that Gawker had genuinely crossed legal and ethical lines, and that the verdict was legitimate. All technically true, but that defense missed the darker implication. In America's justice system, the wealthy don't just have better access to lawyers. They can fund the complete destruction of their enemies through litigation, selecting the perfect case, the perfect plaintiff, and the perfect strategy to achieve not justice, but annihilation. The wealth and power dynamics exposed by the Gawker case revealed uncomfortable truths about American capitalism. We like to believe that the legal system provides equal justice, that journalism holds the powerful accountable, that David can still beat Goliath. But what happens when Goliath can fund 100 Davids, each one a proxy in a war? The target doesn't even know they're fighting until it's too late. Peter Thiel emerged from the Gawker destruction not diminished but enhanced. He demonstrated capability, ruthlessness, and strategic brilliance. In Silicon Valley's halls of power, the message was clear. Thiel was not someone to cross, not someone to expose, not someone to make an enemy of, unless you were prepared for a war that might take a decade and end in your complete destruction. The business lessons from this corporate scandal are chilling in their clarity. First, that patience multiplies power. Thiel waited 9 years, letting Gawker forget, letting their guard down, ensuring that when the strike came it was overwhelming and total. Second, that proxy warfare is the ultimate billionaire strategy. By funding Hogan rather than suing himself, Thiel maintained deniability until victory was certain. Third, that in modern capitalism, wealth doesn't just buy comfort or luxury. It buys the ability to reshape reality, to eliminate obstacles, to wage wars that redefine the boundaries of power itself. Some journalists tried to paint Thiel as a villain, a vindictive billionaire who destroyed press freedom. Others saw him as a hero who'd held an irresponsible media company accountable. But both perspectives missed the deeper truth. Thiel had simply demonstrated what's possible when you combine unlimited resources with unlimited patience and a clear enemy. He'd shown that in the world of extreme wealth, revenge isn't emotional. It's strategic, calculated, and executed with the same precision as any other business acquisition or corporate takeover. The money and greed at the heart of this story wasn't about Thiel accumulating more wealth. He didn't need it. It was about something more fundamental to human nature. The desire for retribution, for vindication, for the complete destruction of those who've wronged you. Most people can't afford that luxury. Most people have to forgive, forget, or accept that justice is beyond their reach. But when you're worth billions, you can buy a different kind of satisfaction. The satisfaction of watching your enemy disappear completely, erased from the landscape as thoroughly as if they'd never existed. Years later, Thiel spoke about the Gawker case with the detached rationality of someone discussing a successful investment. He framed it as philanthropy, helping others access justice they couldn't afford. He suggested he might fund more cases against media companies he considered abusive. The threat was implicit, but crystal clear. There was a new sheriff in town, and he had deeper pockets than any media company could match. The rise and fall of Gawker became a case study in business schools, not about journalism ethics or media law, but about power dynamics in modern capitalism. How do you defend against an enemy with unlimited resources? How do you maintain accountability journalism when billionaires can eliminate critics through perfectly legal means? How do you operate in a world where wealth doesn't just influence the rules, it rewrites them entirely? The financial mystery at the heart of this business documentary is ultimately about the price of revenge. For 9 years, no one knew Thiel was spending millions to destroy Gawker. The money flowed through legal channels, untraceable to its source. It was the perfect crime that wasn't a crime, the use of legitimate legal processes to achieve an outcome that felt anything but legitimate. Today, Peter Thiel continues to operate at the highest levels of power and influence. He's invested in countless startups, shaped political discourse, and maintained his position as one of Silicon Valley's most influential voices. The Gawker destruction didn't damage his reputation among those who matter in his world. If anything, it enhanced it. He'd shown capability, follow-through, and the kind of ruthlessness that, in Silicon Valley's culture of disruption, isn't condemned but quietly admired. The site that published that article in 2007 no longer exists. The journalists who wrote it have scattered to other publications, carrying with them the knowledge that some enemies are too powerful to make. The company that employed them is a digital ghost, its archives sold off, its influence erased. One article, one billionaire, 1 decade of patient revenge, and an entire media empire reduced to a cautionary tale about the real cost of crossing those who have the wealth to wage war through the courts. This business crime story reveals something essential about power in modern America. Justice and revenge are separated only by who can afford the better lawyers. When you have billions, you don't get mad. You get methodical. You don't strike back in anger. You wait for years, fund the perfect case, and ensure that when your enemy finally falls, they fall completely. The real lesson for anyone building a business, creating content, or operating in public spaces is darker than any motivational speech will tell you. There are people out there with resources so vast that your destruction isn't an expense. It's barely a rounding error in their quarterly investment portfolio. Make the wrong enemy, and you might not know you're in a war until the verdict is read and your company is bankrupt. By then, the billionaire who destroyed you might have already forgotten your name, moved on to the next target, the next proxy war, the next perfectly legal elimination of an obstacle in their path. So ask yourself, in a world where someone can spend a decade and $10 million erasing you from existence without ever breaking a single law, how do you protect yourself? How do you build something that can withstand not just market forces or competitive pressure, but the focused, patient, unlimited resourced destruction campaign of someone who sees you not as a competitor, but as a problem to be eliminated? Peter Thiel found his answer in 2007. You become the kind of enemy that no one dares to make. You demonstrate so completely, so thoroughly, so publicly what happens to those who cross you, that everyone else learns the lesson without having to be taught directly. Gawker's destruction wasn't just about settling one score. It was about sending a message that echoed through every newsroom, every boardroom, every place where someone might think about exposing, challenging, or opposing someone with truly unlimited resources. And that message was received, loud and clear, in the silence where Gawker used to be. Subscribe and listen to our next story below.